Welcome, everybody, to Mom Street USA. My name is Kate, aka the Disney Cicerone, and with me, as always, is the wonderful, lovely Wishes Mama, aka Jackie. On this episode of Mom Street USA, we are going to talk about comparing Disneyland and Disney World. Now, this will be a little bit of a mini-series that we start just because we get this question a lot of people saying that maybe they're Disney Worlders who never do Disneyland or vice versa. And we want to make sure that we're giving you kind of, as well as we can, a side-by-side comparison of the two to help you kind of decide which one you'd like to go to, or maybe if, some information on if you're used to one, how to go to the other. So anyway, Jackie, how are you doing today?
I'm good. Yeah, I'm excited to kind of see side by side and hear. I know you've got some great info about when we get to our rides portion of this today. So
yeah, you can't take the history out of the Cicerone.
It's so true. But that's why we love you. And I'm excited to hear what you have to share with us, because it's all coming from all the years and decades of research that you've done. So it'll be fun to get some history a little bit in this episode. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
I do want to put a disclaimer that I've barely looked at these notes, so it's just going to be off the top of my head, whatever I supply. So you might get some very random facts today.
It's going to be great.
And it is what it is.
We love it. It's going to be great. It's going to be awesome. I'm excited. Shall we dive in?
Let's go for it.
Okay. So the first thing that we want to kind of just cover is just a general overview, right? Because whether you're someone who's frequented one side of the country parks or the other one, or neither, or both, there are some very big differences that we want to just kind of highlight to start. And then we'll kind of jump down into more specifics from there. So if we're looking at just general size of the parks, we've got Disney World, which is in Florida. If you are unfamiliar, that's the one on the Florida side. We've got 4 main theme parks and 2 water parks on that side. And Disneyland, which is your California side, you've got 2 theme parks over on that side. So that alone is the biggest, I would say, difference that a lot of people think of automatically when we talk about comparing the two.
Yeah, and before we get too far into this comparison, I do want to mention that we did recently do an episode on doing Disneyland as a Disney Worlder that goes very in depth of how to do that. So this is more of a comparison between the two, but if you're looking for that information, check out that episode for that.
Yes, good call, because I almost forgot to say
that. So in terms of number of attractions, Disney World's got 173 attractions across their 4 theme parks, whereas Disneyland has 68 attractions across their 2 theme parks. So there's definitely more to do in Disney World, which just would take you longer in general. So something to think about there.
Yeah, and I think with the larger space to navigate at Disney World, you've got to think of that you've got more to navigate from park to park, right? Transportation is a huge part of your trip when you visit Disney World. So whether you're using the buses, whether you're using, water transportation with boats or whatever it may be, transportation is huge at Disney World. Whereas with Disneyland, if you want to park hop, you just simply take your feet and walk across the plaza.
There's in fact no other way to get across there unless you rent an ECV, I guess.
Right, exactly.
That's how you're going.
Yes. So vastly different when it comes to transportation from park to park.
Right. So the 4 parks in Disney World, they all give kind of completely different vibes. So we've got the Magic Kingdom, which is kind of the classic one, which was not meant to be a duplicate of Disneyland. It was meant to have its own kind of thing. But because Walt Disney passed away before it was built, there was a lot of things that they did that kind of was a duplicate in some ways, especially with Fantasyland. There's also Epcot, which opened in 1982. That is for has more culture, adult vibes, food, and all those things. And it's essentially kind of 2 sections in one, because it was originally going to be 2 different parks, and they pushed the models together and made one big park. So that's why you have World Showcase, which is a walk around the world. And then you have what used to be Future World. Now it's all different things, but
world celebration and world nature and world discovery.
Yes,
something like that.
That sounds right. So, and then they have studios. So Hollywood Studios, which is formerly a live studio, which is now that's a little bit lost in identity in that theming. But there's large movie themed spaces was kind of its original vibe, and now it's got several other things to it as well. And then they have one of Jackie's favorites, which is Disney's Animal Kingdom, or as they used to say in the old commercials, not a zoo is how they said it. So I love that you put that in here.
I know.
Not a zoo.
I did. Yes. Yeah, I love Animal Kingdom. It's just such a unique space that I think is something that's really special about Disney World that they have to offer there.
Yeah, and definitely don't think of it as a zoo, because it's not. It's like way more than that. It's immersive theming in different countries with, there's animals around, but it's a lot more than that. Yeah. So then in Disneyland, the two parks in Disneyland also have very different identities. Disneyland, of course, is the original one that opened in 1955. It has a lot of nostalgia, a lot of history, very, I would say, charming and magical are kind of like the main vibes you get there. And it's also, where Walt was, right? So this is where Walt walked. I think that's how people think of Disneyland.
Yeah.
And then California Adventure has been through a lot of transition in its years.
Yes.
Started off as a park that was dedicated to the state of California, which didn't work out too well. So that theme is still kind of around in some ways, but mostly now it's a little bit more, modern. There's a lot going on there, and it's Pixar heavy, it's movie heavy. Avengers, we've got a lot of those kinds of vibes there. So I would say it is definitely more of the modern park versus the historic park across the way. So.
Yeah, I think when I think of Disneyland and the parks there, it's the classic and the modern, right? Like that's kind of now that's very generalized, right? There's a lot more going on in these parks because you've got places like, Galaxy's Edge and some of those other places too that kind of put a different spin on some of the areas. But that's what I feel like I mostly think of when I think of Disneyland.
Yeah. Yep. Definitely.
So your main differences that you're going to see, first of all, are weather. And we've talked about weather on our Mom Street before. We've talked about that on our When to Go episode that we did a couple episodes back. You're going to get hot, warm, muggy weather in Florida. You're going to get generally cooler weather. Now, obviously, it depends on when you go. It depends on what's going on with the weather at the moment, because sometimes you get heat waves in Disneyland and sometimes you get cooler waves.
Heat.
Yes.
That's what we say. It's a dry heat. Yes.
And sometimes you get cooler temperatures in Disney World than you're expecting, but that's kind of generally what you're looking at. A lot more afternoon thunderstorms during the summer months at Disney World. Now Disneyland does also have a rainy season, but it's like the complete opposite time of the year. And they also get the winds too there, which we've talked about all of that in our When to Go episode. So weather-wise, completely different.
Yeah, so I usually alternate between going to Walt Disney World one month and Disneyland the next. And so how I pack for it is completely different, because my Disney World one, I always make sure I have my umbrella and my poncho, or like always. But I only do that for Disneyland in the wintertime. Otherwise, I just leave my umbrella at home because I don't even need it.
Right.
So yeah, very, very different vibes for that. So it's pretty easy to compare Magic Kingdom to Disneyland for the most part, because they do have a lot of similarities in their vibe and the way that they're laid out. But Disneyland also has some aspects of Hollywood Studios with Batuu and a whole bunch of things too. So it's there's no way we could do like a direct one-to-one comparison about all the things. Like that's just impossible because they're so different. They're just apples and oranges in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But we are going to do some comparisons of some rides and whatnot. Before we do that, I did get a question from Ryan in my chat about, why don't they have something in Disneyland that's like Animal Kingdom? Why don't they have more of these things in Disneyland? Which is a good question.
Yeah.
And the reason is space. Disneyland, when Walt Disney purchased it in 1955, they only had so much money. They only bought, it was in the middle of an orange grove. There was nothing around it. They kind of created that section of Anaheim, to be honest. And what he called them the leeches. That's what Walt Disney called them. The leeches were the businesses that swooped down and bought all the property around Disneyland, and then, jacked up the price so he couldn't afford to get it even later on. So Disney has been able to purchase some parcels that are around Disneyland. And, that's why we have parking lots and things like that.
Right.
And now Disneyland Forward, there's a lot of plans going forward for the Horizons and whatnot, like of things that they're adding to Disneyland, which we heard about at D23. So Disneyland is expanding, but not in the same way that they ever could in Disney World, just for lack of space. And that's why when they did Disney World, they bought way more space than they could ever need. They actually said, this is like twice as much as we needed, but the land was so cheap. They're like, whatever. So we always say the twice the size of the island of Manhattan is what they've always said since the beginning. And that's really what happened there. So,
right. Well, they definitely learned, right? They knew that they didn't want that to happen again.
No.
And part of that is also why these parks are so vastly different and why you have such a high percentage of annual pass holders and locals at Disneyland is because it is truly in the middle of
the city.
The city.
Yeah.
And access is so much easier, and it's within walking distance of a lot of different places, or you've got the public transport and things like that. Whereas Disney World, there are still annual pass holders, but they're all out of town for the most part. Not all, but the majority is out of town or out of state. So just completely different just because of the amount of space and land that they had.
Yeah, it's about 20% annual pass holders are the attendees at Disney World versus almost 70 to 80% in Disneyland. So it kind of gives you an idea of the people that are attending the parks. And also when they established Walt Disney World, they very clearly called it from the beginning, the Vacation Kingdom was the name that's in all of the advertising in the early years in the 1970s, because that's really what they wanted it to be, was a destination for everybody on the East Coast to be able to go to. And it was the 1964 World's Fair that was the proving ground to see, would they have interest in what Disney has to offer here on the East Coast? And the rides were so successful. They had, Small World and Ford's Magic Skyway and Lincoln, and missing one. What's the fourth one? I'm missing one. Carousel of Progress. They had all four of those at the 1964 World's Fair, and they were so successful that they're like, obviously we need to build something over here, and so that's how we got that's how we got Walt Disney World on the East Coast. So
right. Yes. All right.
I told you, I can't turn the history off.
You're so okay. No, it's perfect. It gives such good insight, right? And I think that you really have to have some of that history in mind when you're visiting the different places, because especially if you're someone who's used to Disneyland, you cannot expect Disney World to be the same. Right. The vibe is completely different.
Very different.
The experience is completely different, and vice versa, right? If you're at Disney World going to Disneyland. So, but I think having some context, as to why it is the way it is, I think is helpful.
Yeah. I mean, I always say that Walt Disney World is a marathon, whereas Disneyland is like a stroll.
Yeah.
So doesn't mean that a long day at Disneyland doesn't happen, because they are very long days, especially with their hours are very long and whatnot. But it's just totally different in that way. It's very physically demanding, mentally demanding at Walt Disney World.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so shall we talk about some rides?
Yeah, let's go there.
Okay, so we are going to do our best to kind of give you an overview without giving you every little nitty-gritty detail about these rides. We're going to first start by talking about rides that exist on both coasts. So we're talking about rides that go by the same name that exist on both coasts. And we're going to do just a brief comparison that Kate is going to help us out with, because I have not been to Disneyland. So as much as I have heard about, seen, watched videos of some of these ride-throughs, I have not experienced them. So we're going to pull from Kate's expertise, being both a worlder and a lander, maybe more of a lander than a worlder.
Depends on where I'm at in any particular month.
Yes. And I will just let our wonderful Mom Street community know that Kate does host another podcast that is called Distery with Kate and Kirk, where they go through so many of these rides and they give the itty bitty nitty gritty little tiny baby details for all of these. So they've done full-fledged series on so many of these rides. Haunted Mansion, Jungle Cruise, Big Thunder Mountain. You did
Snow White.
Snow White is the one they're in the middle of now. You did Pirates, but I know you're going to go back and revisit that.
It's not a bad episode, but
no,
it's too short.
Yes. So, and then some, right? They've covered so much of this. So if you are someone that is listening to us right now that wants more of what Kate is about to give us with these ride comparisons, and you want to know about the idea behind it, the concept art, the building, you want a step-by-step walkthrough of the queue and all of the track of the ride, go listen to her other podcast, because it is so much fun.
Thank you, Jackie, for the
You're
plug.
welcome.
Yeah,
Of
that's
course.
more details than you probably thought you'd ever need to know. And
It's great.
all the history. That's what we do at Distery, and
Yes.
that's kind of what I do outside of Mom Street.
Right.
Also, with
Yes.
my own content is obscure Disney history with a dash of encouragement. So get ready for just a little tiny taste of that. Let's head over to the Jungle Cruise.
Yes.
So Jungle Cruise, I'm going to try to keep this as brief as possible, but Jungle Cruise is the ride that originated in Disneyland in 1955. It was an opening day attraction. So it was also an opening day attraction in 1971 in the Magic Kingdom, but they're not identical. They do have slight differences between them, which would take me many podcast episodes to explain. But it's, they're both jungle vibes. They're both got the elephant bathing pools. They're just not in the same location in both of them. There's better staging in the Cambodian temple because Mark Davis learned with the Disneyland version that he didn't stage it well, and Walt got mad at him, and then he learned his lesson. So there's an indoor section in the Disney World version that's not in the Disneyland version. The queue for Disneyland has a 2-story boathouse, so you'll actually end up climbing upstairs when it's busy, which can be really tight on the stairs going back down. So just remember, left is always right. Very important. When you get to the top of the stairs in Disneyland, go to the left because people don't realize the line splits into 2 and you can go either direction. And there is theming that is tied with the new storyline that came out in 2021 in both. I would say, though, that the queue of Disney World has way more of it. They have these things that Imagineer Kevin Lively talked about with us, and he called them like Hogwarts houses, but they're the Jungle Cruise cruise that you see their doors in that section in Walt Disney World. So that's kind of a unique feature of that Disneyland doesn't have. So, but other than that, I'd say the ride itself still features, jungle jokes. But Disney World does have the Jingle Cruise overlay, which Disneyland used to have and doesn't anymore. So if you're going in the holiday season, you can experience that.
Yeah. And that typically runs, it usually starts like the second-ish week of November, third-ish week of November, somewhere in that. And we'll run through the holidays for that.
Right.
Yes. All right. Pirates. I know this one is this one I know.
Like marathon.
I know. It's like, all right, Kate, let's go. Give us the quick details about the comparison between Disney World and Disneyland Pirates of the Caribbean.
This is really fun for me. So, so Pirates opened in 1967 in Disneyland, and it was the last attraction that Walt Disney really worked on before he passed away. He didn't quite get to see it done, but he did walk through it before there's water in it. He did walk through it. I have a really sweet story about how Lillian, his wife Lillian, would come with him to check out the attractions, and he would make sure they put down wood planks so she wouldn't have to walk through the mud, which is just so sweet. So
I love that.
Anyway, so Pirates of the Caribbean in Disneyland is much, much longer, mainly because they had a few iterations of this ride that they were going to do before they actually built it. And one was a wax museum that was going to be in the basement of this building that was called the Bayou Mart. And they decided after the World's Fair, the capacity was king, and to expand it into an exterior show building. So now when you go down your drops, you're in the basement first, and then you have to go out under the train tracks into the exterior show building. And so the show is very long. It's about 12 minutes ish because of that, and has some additional scenes that Disney World does not have. Now, Disney World wasn't supposed to have pirates at all.
I knew that.
They thought that people in Florida wouldn't be interested because they are already pirated out, essentially, that pirates already exist there in lore and whatnot. So they thought, let's build the Western River Expedition, which was Mark Davis's baby. Basically like a Western version of Pirates, to put it. There's a lot more than that, but I'll just
put it briefly.
Yes. And so they didn't really have the budget for it. So they kind of stole the budget from a whole bunch of other places, Jungle Cruise and, this big giant mountain complex called Thunder Mesa that they were going to build. And they poured it into making pirates because people were like, well, we're not going to go to Disney World. They're telling their friends, don't go to Disney World because they don't have pirates there, because they've been watching it on TV every Sunday, like them make this ride. So anyway, they had to build pirates, and they did, and it opened in 1973. But they cut out a lot of the scenes from it. They didn't need that Blue Bayou Mart basement area. And so they cut that part out. And then Mark Davis still wanted to put the up waterfall was supposed to be in Western River Expedition because the flash flood was the main thing that happened in that ride. So he's like, well, I'm not going to put it in this one because I still want to make that ride. And if I put it in this one, they're going to say, well, we can't have two of the same thing in the same park.
Yeah.
So that's why at the end of the Walt Disney World one, you just get out in the basement and you don't go like chugging up the waterfall like Walt Disney wanted. So it makes it about 8 minutes in Disney World versus there's different theming as well for the area and whatnot. And I'll try not to, I think I'll just end it there because we're going to talk a long time about that. But they're definitely different vibes. But some of the scenes look almost identical in both because they just were trying to save money. So they just duplicated things. So.
All right, next, we're just going to run down the list. Kate's going to be exhausted by the end of this episode. This one's easy. Let's talk about the Tiki Room.
Tiki Room is an easy one. So that one opened originally in Disneyland in 1963. Was the very first audio animatronics that ever existed. And it was sponsored by United Airlines because of all the flights after the war. People started deciding they wanted to go back to Hawaii where they were like stationed during the war. So they were offering flights to Hawaii, and so they're using the Tiki Room to promote it. And so Dole sponsorship didn't come into way later. But anyway, so the Tiki Room in Disneyland opened, but when they're putting in the Walt Disney World and building that, they're like, well, let's make this called the Tropical Serenade, which is pretty similar to the Tiki Room, quite honestly. It went away for a little while, became under new management with Iago. That version, which some people love and some people are like glad that it's gone.
Very polarizing, that version of the Tiki Room. Very polarizing.
Yes.
Look it up if you don't know what we're talking about. It's a good time.
Yeah, but the attic caught on fire and then they just used it as an excuse to change it back into, instead of Tropical Serenade, it's the Enchanted Tiki Room.
Yes.
But that's essentially what you get now. And there's some small differences between the two. Mostly there's the enchanted fountain that's in the center that will be water that goes up and like pulls the Birdmobile down. But some of it is exactly the same. It is shorter though in Disney World by a couple of minutes because in Disneyland, Let's All Sing Like the Birdies Sing has like a whole nother like verse and like a whistling part to it. And they don't have that in Disney World. So that's like the main differences between the two.
And the tourists don't want the whistles, apparently.
That's so sad. That's like one of my favorite parts. And I'm like, oh, it's so sad. That was the song, by the way, that they used when they were like, it was the first song they had for the Tiki Room was Let's All Sing Like the Birdies Sing. So
it's a great song.
It is.
All right. Okay. On to something completely different, but not. Let's talk about the flying elephant, Dumbo.
Yes.
We were talking about birds. It sort of goes together.
Yeah, another one that was opening day for both Disneyland and Disney World. And so they knew it was popular in Disneyland. So they replicated it in Disney World. And it was so popular that when they did the new Fantasyland overhaul fairly recently, they added a second one and they rotate in opposite directions, which is really interesting.
You get the dueling Dumbos in Disney World. I think that's what they like branded them as initially when they came out, because I feel like that has like stuck in my brain ever since they moved them. So they literally picked it up and moved it when they did all the renovation of that whole area.
Yeah, but Disney World was the first version to have water underneath it. So that was something that kind of got imported back into Disneyland. And the one that you see in Disneyland now was meant for Disneyland Paris. That's why it looks so dang fancy when you see it. It's like, whoa, this is nice. That's because Disneyland Paris is the most beautiful Disney park. And what happened was Disney there was some mechanical failures to the ride that happened, and they knew it wasn't safe to keep operating it, so they shut it down. And then they'd already built the Disneyland Paris one, so they're like, hey, we'll just buy that off of you. And then because they had time to make another one before the park opened. So, but with this ride, I think my favorite story, just a quick little story, is
how many times are we going to hear Kate say, just really quick, quick little story?
Because the elephants were made separately from Aero Development, made the ride mechanism for the 1955 version. But the elephants were made by Disney, and they were way too heavy. They were supposed to be 500 pounds each. They turned out to be 700 because they added a mechanism where their ears would flap up and down.
Which I wish they could have figured that out. How fun would that be?
I bet they could now.
Yeah.
But anyway, because of that, like the arms that lift it, like really couldn't do it. And so the hydraulic system was struggling, and it created this like foam that was on top of like all of the mechanisms. I'm not an engineer, so this is all I know about this. But I do know that they had to send somebody in, and after every single ride, they would skim the foam off of it so that the hydraulics would continue to operate. And so they called it milking the elephant. And so that's what they did, is they milked the elephant for a long time till they fixed that mechanism. But that's a fun little story about that attraction that I always love. But yeah, it's a standard in both parks, and they're pretty much the same both places now.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on. Let's keep going.
Okay, Mad Tea Party. That's next.
Okay, so this one, again, an opening day attraction in Disneyland, but it looks very different now than it did then. But the teacups are designed by Mary Blair in both places. There's little slightly different designs. The main difference is that in Disneyland, it's outdoors, and they have these like really beautiful colored lights, and the music is different as well. In Disney World, it's covered, but it wasn't in the beginning. That they took it was 1973 when they added a cover to it, because they realized every time it rains, they had to shut it down, and it rains a lot in Florida. So they added the cover to it. And it does have the big teapot in the middle with the dormouse that pops up and down, which is a really fun thing that Disneyland does not have. So that's kind of a neat feature. And Disney World also makes a super obnoxious noise when it ends.
Yes, it does. It goes so loud. That was really good. Yeah, that was like perfect.
And Disneyland doesn't do it. So I know it's like not, it's like must be something about the particular mechanism for that thing. And it's done it forever. And
well, it got wet too many times.
I guess. I don't know. But Disneyland's, they sometimes will close it down if it does rain a lot, but it's just not very often that happens. So Disneyland, I'd say, has way better vibes for their Mad Tea Party, and the music, I think, is better in my opinion. But they're both really fun, and they're similar in the way that they operate.
All right, let's hop over to something that's fairly close by in Disney World, at least. Let's talk about Winnie the Pooh, Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh.
Yeah, Jackie, do you want to talk about what it's like in Disney World, and then I'll talk about it at Disneyland?
So the best part, I think, for kids with this ride, other than the ride itself, is the queue, right? So the queue is so much fun. So many little interactive elements that you kind of go through Rabbit's Garden, and they've got all sorts of little things that you can play with. And there's little bees on little tracks on the beehive, and they've got the lovingly called Pooh Wall that everyone calls it, where you can make the honey disappear and find the hidden characters. Fun note about the Pooh Wall, you don't actually have to touch it to make it function. So keep that in mind. If you've got kids, you can like kind of magic hand it and it'll still work. So just keep that in mind.
Maybe try to sell that to them as use your magic hands, because then otherwise they'll want to touch it. It's so gross.
Yeah. Or just have your sanitizer ready, because that's the last thing you do before you like go on to get in your honey pot. So sanitizer is also your friend in that particular one. But the ride itself, I think, is different from what I know.
Yeah. So there's a lot of the theming is just slightly different. In Disney World, it's more based on the book. So there's a lot of book pages, and it's storytelling with the books, versus Disneyland. It's like you're getting in honey pots in Disney World, but in Disneyland, you're getting in like beehives that you're in. And so it's more like bee themed and like fall themed. There's like a lot of leaves going on. It's been a while since I've been on it, to be honest, because it's been closed part of the time and stuff. It's been a weird year for that section.
Yeah, they're doing some refurb over in that space and changing some things out for when Tiana's gets ready to open. So
yeah, they have some similar scenes, though. You know, they have the Heffalumps and Woozles. They both have those kinds of things. And there's also no interactive queue here. But the line generally, unless it's a super busy day, goes relatively quickly. I'd say faster than the one in Disney World most of the time. So it makes sense that they'd have interactive queue at Disney World.
Right. Okay, so let's talk about something that is very easy to talk about. Let's talk about PhilharMagic, because it's identical, other than the queue area and kind of the walkthrough to set up to get into the theater. But other than that.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's not in Disneyland, it's in California Adventure. So for Disneyland's version, it's actually like in this theater that's almost hidden. So you have to kind of like know where it is to get to it. It's on your park map and whatnot, but it's not, it's kind of like tucked off of the main part of the street. So you just like don't necessarily know it's back there. But it is there, and yeah, they're identical. So in Disney World, it's more prominent. I'd say it probably is better attended because it's also, there's less to do in Magic Kingdom overall. So I think it's one of those things that people can do to get out of the elements for a little while. An interesting part, though, about Walt Disney World is when they built that theater for the Mickey Mouse Revue way back in 1971, they did not build the waiting area large enough. So the waiting area only held like 300 people, but the theater holds 500. So they had to find a place to put 200 extra people. And so they've kind of like figured it out with lines and queues and stuff like that, kind of like restructured it over the years. But in general, that space doesn't hold the max capacity for that theater. So if it ever is like a rush on PhilharMagic, which just like never happens, it would not, the line would go well outside of that queue. So
yeah. I did not know that.
Yeah. Little mistake. Whoops.
Oopsies. I mean, minor detail, right?
Yeah, who's counting? It's fine.
All right, let's continue our trek through mostly Fantasyland rides here. Let's talk about Peter Pan.
Yeah, so Peter Pan originated in Disneyland, 1955, an opening day attraction, but not as it is now. The version we have now has elements that were there, especially the London scene. That's pretty much been there since the beginning. But the whole back part of the ride where you fly over the pirate ship and whatnot, that actually was imported from Walt Disney World when they made the 1983 remodel of Fantasyland, because they pretty much just raised all of Fantasyland and took everything out and then built it up from scratch. But Disneyland still has this iconic scene where you're flying over Neverland and there's like stars everywhere that is just really special. But Disney World has its own kind of flying over Neverland scene where they have mermaids and whatnot. So they're like they're very different in that way. And Disney World definitely has a better queue. Their interactive queue is fantastic with, you know, the shadows that you can play with and whatnot. And you can use your Disney Play app to do a whole bunch of games in there. Yeah. There's even Pixie Dust at one point. You can watch Tinkerbell fly around the room. That queue is wonderful.
So fun.
Disneyland does have a Disney Play app feature. It's got a Tinkerbell that will appear in a lantern. And the Play app is basically like a scavenger hunt of like little tiny things that are embedded in like the wood and whatnot. So it's a fun thing to look for kids, because there's not a lot to do in that queue and not a lot to look at, because it's like people like really close together.
Right. So, right. Well, and that's a really good point, right? About a lot of these queues, when we look at the queue differences between Disney World and Disneyland, is Disney World had more space and planned for more space to be able to have more elaborate queues that have these scenes of these, you know, the kids' bedrooms and this whole space of Rabbit's Garden at Winnie the Pooh. But Disneyland does not have that space. So these queues are single file, tightly wound switchback queues.
In Fantasyland especially.
Yes, that's the space they had to work with. So we you know, it's like the sacrifice of like sacrificing, you know, we need the little queues so we can have more rides, right? Otherwise we would not have as much space for rides as we do in that area of Disneyland.
Right. And Disneyland does not have a lightning lane access at all, which is a huge difference for Disney World. And that ride is very popular at both. So just plan on, you're going to wait for that ride in Disneyland. I recommend either doing it very early in the morning or very kind of late at night. Those are probably your best bet for when to have a less wait there. But
and that works with Disney World too. I mean, if you're using a lightning lane, great, but if you're not, you're going to want to rope drop it during early entry, go during the fireworks, or go right at the end of the night. It's just one of those, it's tricky to get on. So if it's a priority, you need to make it that priority.
Yeah. It's also a little bit longer in Disney World than Disneyland too in terms of runtime, but that's pretty much that. Should we talk about I never remember the name of this ride. You just put mermaid. So like,
because I just put mermaid,
Little Mermaid.
Yeah, under the sea. I think it's under the sea Voyage of the Little Mermaid.
That sounds right. Sure, let's go with that. So this ride is
really long. It's a really long name.
Almost identical in terms of the actual ride. The queue itself is not identical. So in Disney World, this was what replaced 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. So they decide, well, there's a long story to that, but let's just say that space at one point used to be 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And so they made the queue very much water themed in respect to the history of that. And there's also a little nautilus that you can see in the rocks in the queue as well. And when this attraction opened in 1983, it was supposed to have a Scuttle scavenger hunt. Do you remember that?
No.
Heard of that? Okay. We're going to talk more about that in Distory, I think. But And in any case, there's a lot of little things you can find and look at in the queue, little projected crabs and whatnot. And like, there's lots of like, you actually see an animatronic of Scuttle. The inside section, when it's actually like full, there's all kinds of like interior queue stuff that I've only seen like once because it's
I know. That's what I always tell, because my daughter loves Ariel. Like, Little Mermaid has been her favorite since she was able to tell me it was her favorite, like forever. And we always are like, oh, there's like pictures on the ceiling in that one section.
Yeah.
And like, it's like, right? I want to go over there, but the line is typically not long enough to wind you through the extra queue parts, because it's a long queue. Like, it's a long walk from entrance, even without any extra sections open. It takes a while to get under the sea, so that makes sense.
Well, it doesn't if you're in California Adventure, which is in Disneyland, where this one is at, which used to be in the Golden Dreams Theater that they converted into this attraction. But they really are just identical in terms of rides, but the queue is just like a mural. That's pretty much it. There's the queue is nothing to write home about in Disneyland because it was something else before. So yeah,
makes sense. All right. This one I think I'm really interested to hear you talk about. Let's talk about the Disney Railroad, because I hesitated about whether or not to put this on the list, but I was like, it is so vastly different and it serves such a different like function that like we can't not talk about the railroad.
Yes. Okay. So buckle up. The Disneyland Railroad. Of course, everybody knows how Walt Disney loved trains. That's no secret. And so the railroad was very near and dear to his heart. And obviously an open day attraction. It was then sponsored by the Santa Fe and Disneyland Railroad. So that's why you see the CK Holiday was the name of the president of Santa Fe Railroad. So that's where that name comes from. But so it's interesting because in Disneyland, I'm like really kind of narrow myself down to comparisons here. So in Disneyland, this was always how Walt Disney wanted people to tour the park before they walked down Main Street USA. That was in the early prospectus. They said first you would go up and you would go on a grand circle tour, and then you would start your progress in the park, because it was like you could get a preview of everything that was to come. You could kind of like, scope out the land and see what was there, right?
Yeah.
It's also built up on this berm in Disneyland, which the dirt, they basically, if you don't know what a berm is, it's like a whole bunch of dirt that they piled up to kind of create a visual block so you wouldn't see Anaheim around it, right?
Yeah.
That doesn't exist in Disney World. And the reason for that is because everything that was outside of the Magic Kingdom was themed to match what you should see in the Magic Kingdom. You were still inside the Disney bubble, so you didn't have to block out anything. So from Tomorrowland, you'd see the Contemporary. From Adventureland, you would see the Polynesian. And so on and so forth. And that's been adjusted a little bit because of the Grand Floridian got added and all that stuff. But the idea was the sightline was you didn't need a berm because you could still see all the things that are outside there and it would be okay. So in Disneyland, you would go and you explore all these things and then you could go. And so today, Disneyland's railroad is so different because we use it as a form of transportation around the parks, which I think is so funny. Because they do in Disney World, you really need it more. It's such it's like there's a lot more walking, a lot more places you can't access easily. Like there's a lot of easy places that you can get around Disneyland, whereas Disney World you can't. So I feel like they should use it, but the train does not run the full time of the day like it doesn't mostly in Disneyland. Depends on the day.
Now it usually stops around like 6 or 7.
Yeah, which is so early, which is crazy to me. And the other thing is that Disneyland has things you can see while you're on the train. It's like a whole adventure. Like there's you're in New Orleans Square, you can see the props for Mardi Gras, and you can go by the Rivers of America, which is really beautiful. And then you go into, remember how we talked about Ford's Magic Skyway? Well, they have the dinosaurs from Ford's Magic Skyway in there. You go back in time. You go to the Grand Canyon diorama, and then you go back in time and see the dinosaurs. And so it's like this whole mural thing that you get to go experience that does not exist in Disney World. So the train is sadly the best part of the train in Disney World, I'd say, is the part that goes by Big Thunder. And they specifically designed that scene so that it would be interesting for people on the railroad. But that's pretty much it. And it's sad.
Yeah. And they just added some new like commentary to the Disney World Railroad, correct? When they reopened it after Tron, I think they adjusted and added some new voices.
I think so. I haven't been on it in a while.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
So it's almost to me like they're trying to make it more like Disneyland because they added some more storyline and you get some characters that talk over it. But I think part of the reason why they don't leave it open is because I don't think they light anything that you can see. There's not a ton that you can see from the Disney World Railroad, but I don't think they have any like lights on it.
There's
so
nothing out there. It's just like
it's a few
Florida
little things
scrub.
here and there, and like and trees. Like
they do have some alligators that are looking at a little stump that has a frog on it. And that frog was one of the original frogs that was removed from the Jungle Cruise in 1973. So you can go see a little baby frog surrounded by alligators. You're welcome.
I will mention the Disney World Railroad does go through, there is like a tunnel and windows for Tiana's Bayou Adventure. So it does go kind of under and through the last scene of that.
Which Disneyland does as well.
Yeah. And then you can also see Tron from the one section they added kind of like windows for the one section in Tomorrowland.
It's way lamer than I thought it would be.
Yeah, it's not
I'm
great.
not gonna lie.
It's just a window where you can see it. Like, it's not anything. It's better to honestly walk over to see Tron than it is to ride the railroad.
Yeah, so you can watch it go by overhead and whatnot. Yeah.
Yeah, and I will say that while the Disney World Railroad does function as transportation, it's not always the most convenient way to get from place to place.
No,
because
you have to have a lot of time.
There's a stop at right when you get into the park on Main Street, right? The main train station. There is a stop behind Tiana's kind of in that section area.
Well, there's Main Street section that's Frontierland. So they have Frontierland Main Street. It used to be Frontierland Station, and then when they added New Orleans Square, they made it New Orleans Square / Frontierland.
I was talking Disney World.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
No, you're okay. Yeah, so Disney World. So yeah, they have Main Street, then they have by Tiana's, and they have over in Storybook Circus, which is, we were just talking about Dumbo over there, and that's it. Like, those are the only other stations that you have. So like, it's really not always super convenient to get from place to place in Disney World using that.
Yeah. And it's also really fun in Disneyland because it goes kind of in the middle behind the facade for Small World, which is really neat. That's like one of my favorite views is you see Small World and then you see the Matterhorn behind it. It's just beautiful, beautiful view. So
yes.
And also Disneyland has the Lily Bell, which is like a VIP tour that you can do and go see this special train car for VIPs that Walt's wife Lillian actually helped decorate. So that's not something that is available in Disney World. But
right.
Anyway, enough about the railroad.
Enough train talk. Yes, let's talk about Big Thunder Mountain.
Okay. This is hard because it's like we just did like a 20 episode series on this.
Yeah. So again, if you want the details, go check out Distery with Kate and Kirk. But Kate, give us a brief comparison for the two.
They are very similar in their ride systems. Disneyland is flipped from Disney World, so the reversed. And the main reason for that was because that was how it fit in the space in Disneyland. It was originally designed for Walt Disney World first, but it was constructed in Disneyland first as a replacement to the Mine Train Through Nature's Wonderland attraction. They both have very similar ride setups, but they're missing. In Disney World, they don't have the goat, dynamite eating goat. In Disneyland, they don't have the town of Tumbleweed, because in the section where that would be, it butts up about 25 feet away from Fantasyland. So they made something called Coyote Canyon that you go through to hide the fact that you're really close to Fantasyland.
Yep.
So beyond that, the storytelling in the queue for Disneyland, it's just like you're just kind of walking through. We have Rainbow Ridge, which is left over from Mine Train Through Nature's Wonderland, which is really wonderful and lovely, and is where Walt and Lillian love to go stroll in the evenings together, which I think is very romantic. I have a little romantic side notes about them this evening. I don't know. But in Disney World, their queue is incredibly elaborate. In fact, I think we did 2 or 3 episodes on it for Distery because of all the unique storytelling that's in it, plus 19 references to the Apple Dumpling Gang. So if you love that movie, you got to check out that queue. But other than that, the ride systems and whatnot, very, very similar in both. The ride experience is going to be very similar in both. But they're definitely different animals in terms of the queue experience and how you actually physically go through it, because you're like, it's like going backwards right? So it's not, you're not actually going backwards. It's like,
right. It's like a mirror image
first. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're going through the looking glass, if you will.
Yeah. Did I do good? I didn't talk too much about it.
I'm so proud of you. All right. I will take the next one because it doesn't exist yet in Disneyland, so I can talk about this one. So let's talk about Tiana's Bayou Adventure. And I did add this on our list because it will be opening at Disneyland. November 15th is what they announced at D23. So we do have Tiana's Bayou Adventure, formerly known as Splash Mountain, at Disney World, that opened a couple months ago now. I feel like I've lost track of all time and when it actually opened.
Sure. A couple months. That sounds great. Yes.
So as far as that goes, with the no spoilers for anyone who hasn't ridden it, but the track system has stayed the same as far as the route that you take. The ride vehicles are the same as they were before. So when it comes to comparing the two, we don't completely know yet. We assume that Disneyland storyline is going to match the one that we see in Disney World. And all, posters and concept art also allude to that as well. We also anticipate that their ride vehicles will still be different because they were different when they both existed as Splash Mountain. So in Disney World, you have the side-by-side logs, and in Disneyland, you will have the single file logs.
Tell them why.
To that. Yes, I was going to say, Kate, tell us why.
Okay. So Disneyland opened first, and so that was, they had the single row logs where they didn't have separators in between the people back then, so it was just like you're just kind of like straddling the stranger in front of you,
so strange.
And they would sometimes pack them in there, like it wasn't like you had to you would have like 12 people per log if they decided to like cram them in there. So it was really different. But when they were developing Walt Disney World, they were also developing Tokyo Disneyland at the same time, their version of Splash Mountain. And in Japan, that they're used to being close together. People are like, they're fine with being close. I'm like, but they're not used to being that particular kind of close. Yep. Sitting that way was culturally like a no. Like people wouldn't have ridden it. So they knew they had to redesign the logs for that. So they did. And consequently, they learned that, we can double capacity if we do this at the same time. Now, they also they had to widen the tracks and, reshape the mountain, because people always ask, well, why couldn't they just change the Disneyland version? It would mean you have to kind of overhaul the entire mountain, which they're definitely not doing with this. So I'm sure that the vehicles will be the same as they were, except for maybe the decoration on the front or whatever. But so that's why the logs are different in both, and the colors of the mountains used to be different too because of the location versus west versus east and all those kinds of things. But the original colors were also taken from Mary Blair, but we don't have that anymore, so we could move on, I guess.
Yeah, so we will see once Tiana's officially opens in Disneyland whether or not the ride itself is identical. But again, we anticipate that it will be the same as what we already are now seeing in Disney World.
I think because the Splash Mountain was laid out just a little bit differently, I think there will be differences.
A little bit, yes.
And also because the Anaheim team works so hard on incorporating history into the attraction, I think we'll see. I predict we'll see a little bit more of that. Some of the things,
some nods to Splash, and
which there are a few in Disney World, but something about the Anaheim team, they're really, really, really cognizant of what came before and what was there and how to integrate it into the land. So it'll be interesting to see how that turns out.
Yes, so we'll report back on that. I'm sure we'll talk about it once that opens in November, and once Kate gets to go on it, in December probably, right? You'll get to go on it, I think you said.
Yes, I think early December. It depends on,
right.
So,
and all the, hopefully. Yes. All right, let's talk about Small World when it comes to comparing Magic Kingdom to Disneyland. They are very different, although the song is the same and you're still riding a boat through the ride. They are vastly different attractions coast to coast.
Yeah, so this was an attraction that opened in the 1964 World's Fair as a ride for UNICEF. It actually was completed in 11 months, which is fantastically fast, although Disneyland was completed in a year. So that's just how they did things back then. But they were also completing 3 other attractions plus the Tiki Room at that point. So Imagineering was very busy. But ironically, like Pepsi Cola had called up Disney several times. I think they talked to Card Walker, And they were just like, we would like this attraction. And he was like, we don't have time. And he just like basically hung up and didn't consult Walt about it. Well, this got back to Walt that they had said no. And he's like, we're going to do it.
No.
We're going to do this. We're going to make it happen. And so they did. So, of course, the iconic Mary Blair, Raleigh Crump, Alice Davis for the costuming, and Mark Davis for some of the parts of it too, all kind of came together as a team with the rest of the, and Joyce Carlson worked on the models and whatnot, but they came up with this wonderful, fantastic boat ride through the world to honor the children of the world for the 1964 World's Fair. And when it was done, they brought it back to Disneyland, but they had to create a new facade for it because the facade didn't exist in the fair. And they had something called the Tower of the Four Winds, which is like a kinetic sculpture, which you can still see the model for in Hollywood Studios right now. By the way, it's in one man stream. But Raleigh Crump did not like the Tower of the Four Winds because he said the engineers kind of like made all of the dimensions wrong because they had to make it structurally sound, but he wanted it to be kind of this light, airy, ethereal thing. But they're like, look, we have to like make it so it's not going to
function. We cannot physically do that.
We have to make it safe for people. So he said they ruined it when they made it, and he hated it. He hated the final version that was at the fair. And so when they learned it was $4,000 to move it back to Disneyland, he was like, no, he convinced Walt, like, we shouldn't do this. Let's make up something new. And Walt's like, okay, how about a clock? Because he loved the clocks in Europe, and that's how we get the clock out front. But anyway, so we get this beautiful outdoor area, indoor area that's all this giant flume in Disneyland. It's inside this like trough, essentially, that was a $40,000 trough that they bought for the New York World's Fair. Well, Raleigh Crump had the idea, and he said to Walt, like, what if we had the water go all the way to the sets so you wouldn't see that you're in this trough? And Walt said, no, we paid $40,000 for this thing. We're going to use it, which is very uncharacteristically. Like, Walt wouldn't usually do that.
Norm.
Which is why I think they changed it when they went to the Disney World version.
Yeah.
Even though it's a sad version for me, because it's like, the facade is shrunk down.
Yeah.
It's inside.
It's hidden and you don't get to see it. Yeah.
It's not as pretty. But
and Disneyland utilizes that facade, right? Like you get the nighttime projections on it and things like that. And so like Disney World's is just buried behind, you don't even see it until you're almost on the ride. Like, because some of the queue is
rained so much
top.
Is why they did that, I think.
And like, I get that. Like, I get the covering of it, but like, it's so tiny and so far down in there that, you don't even get to see it.
Yeah. But that's why they also made the water go to the sets, because they didn't have the trough this time. That was their idea. And Walt wasn't around to say anything else. So that's a very significant difference between the two. Disneyland's is also significantly longer. There's more going on in that attraction just to kind of keep it shorter. But
in Disneyland's you get IP, which we don't have in Disney World. So Disneyland's you will see Disney characters in the different scenes where they belong, geographically.
They belong to,
So you get that in Disneyland's, but in Disney World's they never did that part of it.
And in Disney World, underneath the Eiffel Tower in Disney World, you see Joyce Carlson hanging out there because she worked on every single version of Small World that exists in the world. In Disneyland, on the backside of the Eiffel Tower up high, you'll see Mary Blair holding a balloon. So that's something to look for as you're on those attractions.
Yes. Kate, this is another one. You're going to have to...
Oh, no.
She's like, why are you doing this to me? Okay, let's talk about Haunted Mansion, which is one of, I think, Kate's favorite top attractions. So let's talk about briefly
about it.
You did. Let's talk briefly about the differences between Disney World Haunted Mansion and Disneyland Haunted Mansion.
Yes. So the original Haunted Mansion opened at Disneyland in 1969. And then it was replicated for Disney World when it opened in 1971, but it wasn't a one-to-one replication. Especially the biggest difference you'll see is the outside facade. And now there's a really interactive queue in Disney World. And I imagine we'll have something similar, but not the same in Disneyland, another interactive queue, because it's under construction right now. So what we've seen, I imagine they'll have elements that are interactive in there as well. So they'll have both of those. In terms of inside the attraction, both of them have stretching rooms, but in Disney World, the stretching room just lifts up versus Disney World goes down. I have a whole long story about why that is that I'm not going to get into at this moment, but there is a difference there. But Disneyland, you're going to go down an elevator and then underground essentially, and then we'll kind of work your way back up in the ride. There's a couple of different scenes that are different between the two. The portrait hall for Disneyland is something that's in the queue versus it's on the ride in Disney World. The Sinister 11 is something that shows up in Disney World, which is basically all those creepy portraits that you see that were developed by Mark Davis. You see some of the changing portraits in Disneyland, but you don't see the Sinister 11 in Disneyland. There's also the endless staircase that was added to Disney World. It used to be something else entirely with spiders, but that's gone. So now there's an endless staircase scene that is not in the Disneyland version. And then Disneyland, well, they both have the Hatbox Ghost now, but Disney World is in the wrong place. And Disneyland was the original Hatbox Ghost, except not the original, because he was there for a little bit near the opening of the attraction back in the late 1960s, and they pulled him because the effect wasn't convincing enough, and then they brought him back many years later. So he is outside of the attic, which is not where he originally was supposed to be, but it's closer to where he was supposed to be than the Disney World version, which is just wrong. So
yeah, I think most would agree with you that it's just wrong. And I will also mention that Disneyland does get the overlay. Disney World does not get an overlay for Haunted Mansion. So Disneyland gets the Haunted Mansion Holiday Nightmare Before Christmas overlay. Usually starts, beginning of October-ish. Somewhere in that realm.
In July this year. End of July is when they started it, because they just didn't want to take it all down from when it had it out. So I don't know. It's like 6 months out of the year now. Last time they left it out. They left it up to like almost February last time.
Yeah, it was a long time.
Like, what are we doing here? Like,
yeah. But part of that could have been because they knew it was going to be going under refurb and construction of the queue, but typically September-ish until after Christmas-ish.
Yeah. Halloween plus Christmas time. Yes. And it's very popular. So that's when I think it's the hardest to get on that attraction is when it's like that.
Yeah. And this year, if you are planning to do that attraction for 2024, you do have to utilize a virtual queue. So check your Disneyland construction. Yes, check your Disneyland app if you are planning to do that this current year. Future years, hopefully you won't have to worry about that. Hopefully the queue will be open by this time next year and we won't have to worry about it.
Right. But I will say that Disney World was supposed to get the Haunted Mansion holiday overlay, but they shipped it to Tokyo Disney instead. So that's why they don't have it there, and they've never established it. But, well, that's something also is the difference between Disneyland and Disney World is like they refurbed the mummy in the Disney World version, where now he talks. Like he has he has a mouth, like an
animatronic. It's not animatronic. It's like a computerized mouth
projected.
Yeah, like projection. Yeah. It's weird.
And he looks weird, but
it ruins it.
It ruins the whole thing, because the point was that the old guy is like trying to hear the wisdom of the mummy, and the mummy can't say anything because he's all wrapped up. And that was the gag that Mark Davis made, and now it wrecks it.
Right.
So that would never fly in Disneyland, just saying.
And I don't get why they needed to do that in Disney World anyway. Like,
I don't know. Somebody didn't understand that
but like, why? But like, why? Why was that decision made that they needed to pull him out to add that? I don't get it. All right.
Let's move on.
Yes, let's move on to something that's hopefully a little bit easier for Kate to not go on a deep dive. Let's talk about Buzz Lightyear.
Yeah, this one's easier.
Yes, they are vastly different when it comes to the actual like ride system, and because it is a game system that you do on the ride, they are vastly different. So in Disney World, you get the attached blasters that you have to use for the ride, and then in Disneyland's version, they are like not completely removable, but they're not all the way attached.
It has like a wire that goes down so you can pull it out and aim better. It's much easier to do in Disneyland.
So similar vibe, but different kind of game system just because of the nature of it.
Yeah. In Disneyland, it replaced this old Circle Vision theater. So in the room, I want to say it's the one with Zurg, but I'd have to look again. There's a little sun and a moon that's kind of up near the ceiling that you can look for that are left over from the sign from a extinct show there. And then in Disney World, the sign that's out front was Dream Flight, Delta Dream Flight, with like clouds. And so they kind of covered it up with the sign. It's the Buzz Lightyear sign. And it still kind of looks like clouds. So that's what, and then it was, I think If You Had Wings, I think was there before that. So there are lots of airplane sponsored attractions and then to Buzz Lightyear.
Yeah, lots of reiterations of that space in Tomorrowland.
Yeah, but they're both similar in that there's ride photos at the end that you can get, but like they're not integrated with the system that's in Disney World. Like it's a whole, and I think that's because it's also the same in Disneyland that way. So they're very, very similar though, honestly. Like I haven't done a direct comparison in my brain to the two of them, and I'm like, I always kind of think of them almost identical because they're really similar.
Yes, although I think there's something about the point system is different.
Yeah.
That I think because you can max it out fairly easily in Disney World, but not as easily in Disneyland. I think, little things like that are different, but overall you're getting pretty much the same experience.
Yeah. They both spin and everything. So
yes.
Yep.
Okay. Let's stick to our space theme. Let's talk about Space Mountain.
Yeah. Okay. So I don't want to go too deeply into this. But I will say the reason we have Space Mountain is because of kind of like the space race and like the excitement over space travel and all that stuff. And so that's what delayed the Big Thunder project a little bit, because they're like, well, we're going to build this. And it was one of the last rides, like big each ticket attractions outside of Pirates that Walt Disney kind of like approved, because even though it wasn't built until way after he passed away, because John Hench had made this really beautiful kind of sketch of this like canonical building. But at that point, I was just reading this aero development thing about how the one in Walt Disney World was supposed to have 4 different tracks that would go in and out of the building and then weave around each other. So think of
amazing.
like the Matterhorn, but like
but
bigger, space and bigger and like more intricate. And so they didn't end up having 4, but they do have 2 in Disney World. So that's a big difference from Disneyland. Disneyland, they simply did not have the space to put 2 tracks. So the capacity is a little bit lower, but that's why you have the side-by-side cars in Disneyland. They just have 1 track with 2 seats each. And in Disney World, they have single rider seats that remind me of the Matterhorn. Yeah. And that they're terrifying in the voice.
It's a lot when you're riding with your little kiddo for the first time.
Yes.
Because you can't sit next to them.
Yeah, it's easier in Disneyland to ride with kids, specifically from a parenting perspective. Yes. It's also, Disneyland has like the music right behind your head. So that's integrated with the ride turn by turn, which makes it so much cooler, in my opinion. Yeah. Disney World, my kids are terrified of the one that's in Disney World, but they like the one in Disneyland because you're kind of sunk down in the seat and you don't feel exposed, like you're going to like fly out or something's going to hit you.
When we rode it for the first time in Disney World with my daughter, when she was finally tall enough, the cast member said, like, okay, well, you need an adult sitting behind her. And I was like, I don't think I like that. But I was like, okay. So my husband sat behind her and like, held she was safe, right? Like they wouldn't let her ride it if she wasn't going to be safe. So let me just get that out of the way right then.
But it's like scarier for kids, I think.
Yeah. And I think just more of you are fairly exposed, especially side to side. Like there's no, like the side part of the car is like at your hip.
Yeah. And it's not even like fully up like your back. Like Disneyland, it's like it's almost all the way up to your head, right?
No,
but like
it ends like where my shoulder blades are.
So anyway, I think that's the biggest difference is those two, is the track system and the load system, the ride vehicles and the music. I think Disney Worlds doesn't have any. It has ambient music that's in like the space,
right? Spacey and you can kind of vibes, but it's not related to the ride itself in any way.
No, and you can, if you ride the People Mover, you can see it sort of from the People Mover. If the lights are on, you can definitely see it, which is kind of interesting. So
yes, it's always fun to look at the track through, because also when you go during the Christmas party and they have the extra lights and things in there, you can see a little bit more of the track. It's always a much different experience when you can see the track a little bit more. I know my husband is over 6 feet and he's like, I don't ever put my hands up on that ride.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's move on to Star Tours.
Yes.
So this one is in Disneyland. It started in Disneyland first. This was part of their new initiative with Lucasfilms, and the idea was like, we got to start putting with the Eisner era. We got to put more things in the park for like the teens and the young adults, right? So this is like, let's integrate things that they like and put them in the park and take advantage of the space race and like all of those things. And that's how we got Star Tours in Tomorrowland. And then they put it in, Hollywood Studios as well. And a lot of people ask me like, why is it not in Batuu? Why didn't they move it? And it's because of its storytelling. It's it's supposed to be a set piece. That's why you see open things in the queue. It's supposed to look like a set. And B, you're supposed to be getting it from Earth. You're supposed to be getting in and going on a star tour of outer space. So you
can't be in space to start. Right.
Right. Yeah. So that's why and it would be really expensive to move. So
Well, and Star Tours has existed long before Batuu even was a thought when it comes to Hollywood Studios, right? And Disneyland as well. Granted, they're much different locations when it comes to the Disneyland side of things, when it comes to Batuu and Star Tours and things like that. But Star Tours itself was not supposed to be an experience where you were on planet, like Kate said. So when they added Batuu, they can't put it in. It doesn't make sense for them to put it in the same space unless they completely redo the way Star Tours looks, and they're just not going to do that.
Right. So the building where it is in Disneyland is used to be the Adventures Through Inner Space attraction. So the really interesting thing is that they replicated the queue for it in Disney World. That was just the old queue for Adventures Through Inner Space. So like the little metal bars that you like walk around, and then there used to be where that big like star speeder is. I think that's what you call it. Like that's where that's where the microscope used to be. So like and it's that way in Disney World as well. So it really is like taken from Disneyland, and then at least the Disneyland C-3PO was used in one of the actual attractions, and I imagine the one in Disney World or in the movies, and I think the one in Disney World is too, but I don't know for sure. So don't hold me to that.
I didn't know that about Disneyland's version. That's cool.
Yeah, they both have the little goose droids in them as well that were repurposed from America Sings. So you can tell they look like they have little goose feet. They're just de-skinned geese from the extinct America Sings attraction. Yes. So yeah, but the ride experience itself very, very similar as motion ones, and they use pretty much the exact same ones. I
think so too.
Scenes.
And we just got the news at D23 that they're both going to be getting Mandalorian and Grogu scenes on both coasts coming to Star Tours.
Which they already have, like in one of them, they have like the transmission that comes through, and like there's already ones for some of the newer characters in the Star Wars.
Ahsoka is in one, I think, or several of them. So yes, basically you're getting the same thing once you sit down in that theater.
Yeah, it's pretty much identical in that way. Smuggler's Run, that one is in Batuu. And Batuu is almost 100% identical in both places. It's actually kind of creepy when you fly between them because you don't know where, like sometimes I think I'm in Florida when I'm actually in California because this looks so similar. Yeah. There is a couple very small differences between Batuu. There's like a hidden Mickey blaster that's in, I think, California and not Disney World. In Disney World, there's a tiny little Millennium Falcon that's underneath the Millennium Falcon. I think there's two of them that doesn't exist in Disneyland. So they have a little bit of differences. And like the entrances are different because in Disneyland, there has to be 3 entrances because of the way it's laid out with Frontierland and Critter Country. And but in Disney World, because there's only 2 entrances, because there's one that goes to Toy Story and there's one that goes off into Muppet area. What is that called? Muppet Avenue.
Muppet Courtyard?
Muppet Courtyard. Muppet Courtyard. That sounds right. But they designed it the same way so that entrance for Disneyland is just like doors for cast members. Like it still exists. It's just different. So the ride is pretty much identical to for Smuggler's Run. There's nothing different about it that I know about.
So
if anybody else knows different.
That's what my research told me as well. So we're going with that. And we might as well just lump on in Rise of the Resistance to this conversation as well. Again, same thing.
They just duplicated it, copy and paste.
Yep.
Done. Yeah.
Yep. So unfortunately, that is one area where if you're running out of time and you've already done Hollywood Studios, it's still worth going back there because just the area itself is very immersive and very cool. But if you've seen it at Hollywood Studios, you may not need as much time at the Disneyland version or vice versa.
The only big difference is there's a lot more characters in Disneyland's version and a lot more rare characters you don't see as often. So if you're like a big character person, they walk around all the time there versus they do walk around in Disney World, but not as often and not as many characters.
Yes.
So,
yes, that's a good point to make.
Yes. So let's talk about Runaway Railway for a little bit.
One of my favorite.
I know. I love this one. So this one opened first in Hollywood Studios. This replaced the Great Movie Ride, if you guys remember that. Great classic, I know. I still want the Muppet Great Movie Ride.
Oh my gosh. Every time that gets brought up, I'm like, can we please have the Great Muppet Movie Ride?
Like, good. Let's just make it happen.
Anyway. Dream. Okay. Anyway, yes.
So this ride itself is not 100% identical, mainly because it's like space-wise, they had to reorganize things a little bit. So like, let me think of. So let's start in the queue. The queue is very, very different. The theming is completely different because they had the Chinese theater in Hollywood Studios, whereas Disneyland, it's like this actual, I'm drawing a blank of what it's called. It's like a theater.
Yeah, and it's in the Toontown section of Disneyland. Right. So completely different vibes from the Chinese theater to a Toontown theater.
Right. And so the queue in Disneyland is fantastic because it pays homage to the entire history of Mickey Mouse, pretty much. From very, very early posters all the way through animation. They have like props in the queue from all the different cartoons. And then it kind of like slowly transitions you in posters to the more modern ones that you're going to see that style on the attraction. But like there's so many little things for Disney history in the history of Mickey Mouse that I could talk for eons about it, but I won't. And then you go and then it's like you're going into a movie theater when you go into it versus in Chinese theater, it's kind of like you are stepping into their own theater, but it's all themed to that. And there's some hidden Mickeys in the chandeliers and on the walls and things like that. But
yeah, but in the queue there, all you're getting are essentially just like marquee movie posters, and because for Great Movie Ride, they used to have movie props and costuming and all this kind of stuff in the queue that you could walk through and see. But all of that went away, and now it's very bare in there and sad. And
they should put the Mickey posters in there, like the old ones,
Right, like they very easily could do something similar with movie posters, but it is what it is when it comes to that.
It is. Yes.
And then the ride itself, there's just a few scenes that are almost just like elongated in Disneyland's version by a little bit.
Disneyland, the first one where you go, like where they're going to hit the track switch, there is something in Disneyland on the left hand side. There's like almost like a ladder with paint and stuff that doesn't exist in Disney World. And near the end, there's like a whole tunnel before the final scene that you go through at Disneyland that isn't in Disney World. But beyond that, it's pretty much copied it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So basically the same when it comes to that one.
Yeah.
All right. We're almost to the end. We're getting there.
You do this.
Let's talk about Toy Story Mania.
Toy Story Midway Mania, because it started there first. So this was an attraction that Kevin Rafferty was kind of set on to go walk around in California Adventure and figure out what in the world that we could make that would appeal to families, because in that park at the time in California Adventure, it was really struggling to have rides that appealed to everybody.
Yeah.
So they were walking around, and of course they had the Midway games there, which Walt Disney would have something to say about that, I'm sure. But
yes.
They had the Midway games.
He was not a fan.
No. But they had these Midway games, and he's like, well, what would it be like if you played a Midway game and you always won every single time? And you could always walk away feeling like you were a winner, no matter how old you were, how young you were. And so they came up with this idea of okay, well, let's check out some games. So they actually did some reconnaissance by going to the state fair and playing games and winning prizes. And there's some really great photos from this era. And so they were going to have a ride where they would actually shoot objects at things, like physical objects, like rings or balls or something. And then they realized that was like a logistical nightmare.
Yeah.
So they changed it to this like
replenish that would not be fun.
get like jammed under the ride.
Yeah. Imagine those poor like the CMs in that situation having to like gather it all and throw it back. No. No way.
So they decided instead, okay, well, and it was actually going to be Mickey and Pals was going to be the ones that hosted it, but they decided putting Mickey as like a barker for Midway Games seemed to be really, really wrong, because he doesn't like have an official job, so like making him have a job, they just didn't think that was a good idea. So instead they went to the Pixar route, and that's how we ended up with the Pixar instead. And there was going to be a scene that had Barbie's Beach Ball Bash, and they couldn't get the rights from Mattel, so we don't have Barbie in it. I know. But
Tour Guide Barbie is one of the best parts of Toy Story 2.
I know.
Come on.
Oh. So they decided to switch it to the 3D, the shooter. I can't think of the words. The objects that you throw at it is not physical anymore. And they came up with this fantastic ride that they would end up having to punch through California Screamin' Coaster to fit it in California Adventure. But when they pitched it, they loved it so much that they're like, make another one for Hollywood Studios.
Yep.
So, of course, it's not Midway Mania over there because it's not in the Midway. So that's why it's called Toy Story Mania in Hollywood Studios and Toy Story Midway Mania in Disneyland. And the queue is really different. I think the queue is better in Disney World because they had more space for it. Right. Whereas space was very much a premium at Disneyland. So there's not very much going on in the queue, just some posters and things, but the ride
and they had the ability to extend it, right? So Toy Story Mania has existed in Hollywood Studios prior to Toy Story Land being a thing in Hollywood Studios. Yeah. So they literally just took the entrance from one side of the building and put it on the other side when Toy Story Land became a thing, and they were then able to add a third track because it had 2 tracks previously and now it's got 3. Right. So they had a lot more space to work with because they could extend the building into the undeveloped Toy Story Land when they first built it.
Right. And that is true that there's a lot more tracks. You're right about that. So the capacity is much, much higher there. And the queue is really fun. And the interesting thing is the animatronic with Mr. Potato Head is outside in Disneyland, actually acting as a barker where he's in the queue for Disney World. So he has a little bit different purpose there, but still a very fun element that still exists in both versions. So
Yes. All right.
That was fun.
It was fun. That was a good one. I know. I was thinking about that as we were getting to that, and I was like, I don't know that much about Toy Story Mania and like how it.
That book with Kevin Rafferty, he wrote Magical Journeys or something like that. It's a fantastic read if you want to just laugh really hard and learn about Disney history. So
add that to my list. Yeah. Kate has the best book suggestions.
Yeah, that would be great for book club for our Discord.
Okay, good to know. I will keep that one in mind for sure. Okay, I think this is the last one on our list for direct comparisons. We've got a couple honorable mentions to talk about here in a moment, but let's talk about Soarin'. This is another easy one.
So Soarin' was Soarin' over California to begin with, right? And then they imported it into Epcot, in the place kind of next to where Food Rocks used to be. First Kitchen Cabaret and then Food Rocks in the Land Pavilion. Which kind of made sense at the time because he still flew over crops and stuff like that. They kind of made it work. The interesting thing is, and it still exists to this day, is because the theme for California is that you're on this like airfield, right? That's the theme for the California version. So all the cast members have like jumpsuits, like they're going to hop into a jet and fly away. Whereas in Disney World, they are flight attendants because you had to get on a plane and fly to California to see it.
Yes.
And that still exists today, even though the ride is now changed to Soarin' Around the World most of the time, not always.
Yeah.
And so I always thought that was really fun that still kind of exists, even though it's changed. But the ride itself, the ride mechanism is the same for both. The queue is where it's very different. Disneyland has all these pictures of these, like, pays homage to the history of, I don't want to say aeronautics, but I think that's not the right word. The history of people in flight. Should I say that? Pilots. There we go. That's probably the word I was looking for. Wow, that was bad. So then in Do you want to talk about what's in Disney World and the queue? Because you know what it is.
Yeah, it's not very
Aviation.
exciting.
Thank you. Aviation. That's what I was looking for.
Thank you. Yes. It's not very exciting, the queue in Disney World. It's very sterile, very airport feel, very like silver walls, and they've got the big screens that you can play with the Play Disney app, the different trivia games and things like that. But that's the majority of what they've got, and that's about it.
Yeah, but I do love the music.
Yes,
music is good.
That soundtrack is Soarin' is like one of my top rides. It really is. Like there's something just so magical about it, right? Like, which is it's crazy to think like you're just sitting in this theater, you know, but like there's just something so magical about it.
You know, it's a really interesting thing that I was reading about it the other day is like when they were filming the scenes, they would put, it was before they like actually established the giant IMAX theater, whatever that it's in, right? They had like a ladder. No, they had the theater, but they didn't have the ride mechanism going. So they had a big ladder that they would climb up, and then they would like
watch it from the top.
Yeah. And see if they got the right shot or not. And then they would go and like communicate to them like, no, we need to get like a little bit more left or a little bit like, so they actually like really honed in exactly how those shots were made to make you feel like you were doing what they wanted you to do. Cool. Yeah. I get people that are mad that it's in the land though, because they're like, this doesn't make any sense for the land. And I agree with that.
I mean, you're soaring over some land.
Soaring over some land. You are soaring over lots of land.
Lots of land. Some water, but mostly land. So, you know.
We do kind of listen to it when like the ice falls in the glacier.
Yeah. It's geography. It's world geography, which is land.
Educational, sure.
Yeah.
I'll take it.
I mean, you're not going to put it in the seas.
No. Like, so where else would you put it? That's good. If you're going to put
it, put it in the air. There is no air that exists.
Mission space, just to replace mission space and put like Soar in there. That's what I would have done probably. But I don't know. It makes sense. I'm happy that it's there. It's okay.
World, land,
I'm fine with it.
It works. That's the best place for it, right? Well, and now it's like, I don't know, what side is that? Is that world nature, right? Is that side of what used to be formerly known as Future World? That's now
it's like Prince. The land.
That's now world nature world. Over on that side, I think.
Yeah,
so that makes sense.
And the seas, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So, okay. Yeah. All right. Anyway, let's just briefly mention, we're not going to go into detail with these ones, some honorable mentions that are similar rides, but not the same. So if you're someone who is familiar with one park or one coast and not the other, here are some comparisons that are close, but not exact for you to just kind of know going into your trip. So at Disney World, we have the Barnstormer, and a similar ride at Disneyland would be Gadget's Go Coaster.
It's like the shortest ride ever.
Yes.
They're both really short.
Very short, very good for your littlest kiddos' first roller coaster experience. A little rocky and rough for the larger riders.
It's tough to cram yourself in there.
Yes, true. And it's not very comfy. The Barnstormer, the backing of it is like ridged. It's just not great. Anyway, but so again, if you are someone who is familiar with one or the other, know that they're very similar in experience when it comes to those two. In Disney World, we have Tomorrowland Speedway, and in Disneyland, we have Autopia. Again, not exactly the same, but very similar experience when it comes to those two attractions.
Yes. Yeah. I think Autopia is a little bit nicer because you get to go under bridges and around things, and it's better landscaped, and it has some characters and stuff. Tomorrowland Speedway's pretty barren.
Meh.
It's shorter too. So Autopia is a much longer ride.
Yes. In Disney World at Hollywood Studios, sorry, had a moment there. I was like, what am I talking about? At Hollywood Studios, we have Tower of Terror. And most of you, if you're familiar with the Disney parks, know that Disneyland used to have Tower of Terror, but now it has been rethemed into Guardians of the Galaxy Mission Breakout. So again, somewhat similar, but also kind of not with this one too, because the sensation is a little bit different where, and Kate, you could really probably talk about like the really way that it falls versus falling versus being pulled, and those types of things are the differences with that.
I think that the biggest difference between the two is it's really fun, like a fun vibe versus a scary vibe.
Yes,
so in
that
Hollywood
as well.
Studios, Tower of Terror is definitely like supposed to be scary. It's supposed to be terror, right? But in the Mission Breakout, like you don't know which song you're gonna get. So it's kind of like you got that with Cosmic Rewind, right? Like which song am I gonna get? And then it's like it's all these like party vibes, even though they're trying to like break out of this thing. It's just really, really fun, even though you're still getting the same ride mechanism. And the queue is obviously really different too, because we have the storytelling of the collector versus, you know, the abandoned old hotel that, you know, lightning struck it and the people disappeared and all those kinds of things. So different storytelling, but the outside of the building still looks very similar in terms of its structure, because they just did an overlay over it. So.
Well, and you get with Mission Breakout, it's way more screen heavy, right? So like with Tower of Terror, once you go out into the elevator shaft, there's no more, you don't get screens. It's all, you know, the windows open and it's light and it's that kind of effect. But whereas with Mission Breakout, you have the characters on screens and things like that. So that aspect as well, if you're someone that's concerned about screens, or, you know, if that's an issue for you, keep that in mind. That is another big difference between the two.
And also the structure of the, they made the Hollywood Studios one first, and they made it so that it actually moves independently. It has actually a guide wire, which is really hard to see. And so sometimes when that ride goes down, it's because it became disengaged from that guide wire. That happens a lot there. There's a little guide wire that actually leads your cage out, and then it engages into the elevator and then goes up and down. They decided that A, took a lot of time, and B, was a whole lot of hassle and also broke down a lot. So they decided to eliminate that one for the California version, also for the subsequent versions in Paris and whatnot. That's why you just get an elevator and then it just goes up and down. There's no like it actually moving out and around, which is a really cool section of that attraction. But they don't have that in Disneyland because of that.
Yes. Good to know. Another similar but not exact we have at Hollywood Studios Alien Swirling Saucers, which is comparable to the Mater's Junkyard Jamboree. Basically the same ride structure. Obviously the theming is different. One, you've got the Toy Story aliens, the others you've got cars, but the ride function itself is pretty much identical with those.
Yeah. And mostly just the theming is different, but they're really fun. And I will say just a little thing that you can listen for in Disneyland's version is there's one song that's in it that is different, that is a little bit different, and you can only hear it every so often because there's a different song like every time it goes, right? So when Kevin Rafferty was he wrote the song, but when he was trying to like sing it to somebody, when he was explaining it, he couldn't remember the words to it. So he was like something, 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 something. And everybody thought that was really funny because he like wrote it, but he couldn't remember the words. So when they went to have Larry the Cable Guy, who does the voice of Mater, actually record it for Disneyland, they said, well, could you do a version where you just say something, 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 something in it? And he did. And so every once in a while you can hear a song where he says that something, something, something. So see if you can find that one with your family next time you're there.
I love that. That's so fun. Another Cars themed one for Disneyland, Radiator Springs Racer. Again, this is not an exact, it has a similar vibe to what Test Track did, but it's not the same. No. But when basically the end of Test Track, now Test Track is under a refurb. We don't know exactly what we're going to be getting when it comes back up for refurb. So we're talking as if it's a similar experience to what it was before. But the end scene, kind of where you go racing out of the building and around, is very similar to a lot of what you get on Radiator Springs Racer. But they are very different attractions.
Vastly, yes. The storytelling is just phenomenal because it's basically like living out your car's dreams. Right. And living out the story of Lightning McQueen in Radiator Springs. And so very, very different vibes in that way. And but should we talk water rides? We've got Cali River Rapids versus Grizzly River Run, which were manufactured by the same company, but Cali River Rapids is way shorter, just way shorter. And the reason is because they were going to have it go by the enclosure. It was going to be Tiger Rapids Run. Sorry, I'm Tiger something. I'm just like, sorry, it's in there somewhere. It was going to be tiger themed. And that's why you still see tigers all over the ride. But they were going to have it go by the tiger enclosure, but then they kind of remembered that animals maybe won't like that, and maybe they won't be there, and maybe this isn't the best idea. So they ended up making it way shorter than they had planned, and that's why it's not as long as it could have been. But Grizzly River Run is vastly longer, and you get way wetter, I think, on Grizzly River Run, unless you get stuck where people are like spraying you with the things like Cali River, which does happen at the end. But
it's like one seat in every raft on Cali gets drenched, and everyone else gets just like some splashes.
Yeah. Whereas
Grizzly River, like, you're gonna get wet.
Everybody's wet.
Yeah.
All full stop. And I think partially this is because the ride vehicles have the rafts have like vents in the floor that are holes that the water comes up when you splash down. Yes. The water comes up through the floor, so you can't think that your shoes are going to stay dry. Nope. Your shoes are going to get absolutely soaked on that attraction because the water is going to come up from the bottom. So if you're used to Cali River Rapids, be aware that your shoes are probably going to get wet. But there are lockers that you can use to stash things in, or switch out to flip-flops or whatever you need to for that ride if you need to outside of Grizzly River Run.
Yeah, and those lockers also exist outside of Cali River too.
Right.
But again, just you're not likely to get quite as wet as Grizzly River.
True. And Grizzly River Run has this fantastic lookout. Also, if you're not going on it, you can go and wander down and basically get this amazing photo of your family going down the giant run. It's a really lovely place to just wander too if you need a little break.
So if you opt to not get drenched and the rest of your family is going to get drenched, you can go, haha.
They used to have this gigantic geyser at the end that was like, you never knew when it was going to come up, and it was just like massive geyser, and if you hit it just right, you were just like, you're totally soaked. But I haven't seen it working in a really long time, so I don't know if we'll ever bring it back. So anyway,
we will have to wait and see. Okay, another ride that I just disclaimer, we're going to talk about Dinosaur and Indiana Jones. I understand that Dinosaur is going away. I get that.
Yeah, so no.
Don't come at me for that. But it is worth noting that the current iteration of Dinosaur is very, very similar to what we get with Indiana Jones over in Disneyland. From what I have heard, and Kate, you can confirm or deny this, the Dinosaur version is a little more harsh on the body than Indiana Jones is.
Oh, no. Opposite way.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. No, what they did, that's partially why the height restriction is so much lower for Dinosaur, is because it's not as rough on you, because it is intense for Indiana Jones, way more so.
Yeah.
So they're both hard on your body, but
yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So we will have to see as they go through with the re-theme of Dinosaur. We don't really know for sure if they are completely gutting and redoing. We don't know if they're just going to work with the existing parts that they have. We don't really know for sure what they're doing with that. So we'll have to see how that changes. But the Dinosaur ride in Animal Kingdom is changing to an Indiana Jones ride. So
yeah,
I imagine that it will stay very similar, if not the same as what we currently have with Dinosaur as far as the track goes.
Yeah, I agree. It just sounds like they're going to do a new story. Yes. But probably the same ride system.
With the timeline that they've said for that space, I can't envision them creating the Carousel, the Encanto Dark Ride, and a brand new, completely new Indiana Jones ride. I just don't think it's feasible. So I'm
not even sure they can do what they've currently said.
Right.
Good luck to Imagineering.
So my thought is similar to what we saw with Splash and Tiana's, right? We're going to get a Dinosaur, an Indiana Jones overlay on top of Dinosaur, for lack of better terms, but in a more technical way.
Indiana Jones is going to get on a dinosaur and ride off in the sunset. That's going to go in Iguanodon. The Iguanodon's going to have a hat too, like Indiana Jones. We're just going to make sure it's all in theme, right?
So, moral of the story, if you're familiar with one and planning to go on the other, understand that it's going to be very, very similar ride structure and experience, and just prepare your body and your back for that particular attraction.
Yeah. Indiana Jones is a lot more intense attraction, I'd say. I mean, they're both really intense, quite honestly. Right. But Indiana Jones is more intense in terms of, like, there's lots of skulls and bugs and, stuff like arrows being shot over your head. It's crazy.
I think the lighting in Indiana Jones is so much better, so you see more of it. In Dinosaur, it's so dark that if you're not looking in the specific space that they light up in any given moment, you may miss the jump scare to an extent. True. And the lighting over the last several months has gotten really a lot worse, unfortunately. I think because they're not going to put a bunch of money into brand new lights and that kind of stuff until they see what they want to do. Right. Sorry. It's tough luck. I don't think it's quite that bad, but I think there's maybe some I don't know, filters or something that need replaced that they're not replacing. I don't know. Last time I saw it online, it was very, very dark. So,
well, I will say that it's interesting because they painted those dinosaurs. They took like the regular colors that they would be, and then they like ratcheted them way up so that you would be able to see the colors because they knew it would be really dark and to make it more exciting. So if you ever think about those dinosaurs, like, and you're like, hey, those really aren't those colors, that's why it was mostly for show.
Yes.
So
yes. So that is the end of our attraction honorable mentions. But I do just want to briefly talk before we jump to resorts, which is our last section for today. Kate, tell us about Fantasmic, because I feel like this is something we just need to at least mention. We've talked about it a lot in Mom Street before about how it is a vastly different experience from Hollywood Studios to Disneyland. So tell us about what Fantasmic is like.
Okay. So Fantasmic at Disneyland, which we've already mentioned, happens around the rivers of America. So in Hollywood Studios, it happens in this gigantic theater that's like eons away for a walk. It's like, I feel like I'm walking to another park when I'm walking to it. But it's great because it has bathrooms and snacks and stuff. So I'll take it. But Disneyland doesn't have such things. And most of the great seating that they built for people to be able to like stand or sit and see the show is now all taken up by people who have like paid to be there. So there's very little places to stand to see the show, which is unfortunate. So you have to go early if you're going to go. But the differences between the shows have very little similarities, except for the fact that it's kind of like this dream and imagination of Mickey.
Right.
And then there are some like princess floats and there are some characters, but like the shows themselves are almost completely different. There's like that one section in Disney World every time there's like the bubbles that happens like for like 10 minutes. I don't know. It feels like forever. And I'm like, what is happening here? Because I'm so used to the Disneyland version that it like throws me every time.
Yeah.
Disneyland has like a shorter bubble section, but it's not like that. And then I will say that they used to have Murphy the Dragon in Disneyland, which was a big, giant, fire-breathing dragon. Right. And then Disney World just has kind of like a puppet version, but it is still really big and impressive and breathes fire and whatnot over the river. I will say that this concept for this, though, was developed for Disneyland back when they were trying to figure out some new nighttime entertainment. One of the Imagineers was had a really long commute from Glendale to their home to Orange County. And so on their commute, they would come up with ideas. And they thought, well, wouldn't it be fun if in the moat of Sleeping Beauty Castle, which we know Disneyland is very, very small, if the moat of Sleeping Beauty Castle, we had, a dragon, and like Maleficent came up as a dragon, and then we had like Mickey fighting her from the top of the castle. And so that's where the idea for Fantasmic originated from. And obviously it grew and grew and grew, and they had to put it in the Rivers of America instead to have more space. But the biggest difference I'd say is they use the Rivers of America boats in Disneyland. Right. So they have the Mark Twain and they use the sailing ship Columbia, which are fantastic the way that they use them. But in Disney World, they just kind of have this like miniature Steamboat Willie boat. It's so cute when I see it.
It's so funny to hear people say how small it is, because for those of us who have not been to Disneyland, it's like, that's not a small boat. What do you mean it's small? But like, I know that
like the Liberty Bell,
yes,
right?
Yes, right.
It's very small.
Yes. But it fits the space.
It does. It's fine.
Yes.
It's fine. It's just when you're used to the Mark Twain, it doesn't. It's like nothing compares to that, right?
Right.
So
yes.
Yeah. So they're very, very different experiences in terms of your seating, in terms of the show itself. Like if you think you've seen Fantasmic one place, you haven't seen it because it's completely different the other place. So
yes, agreed. Yeah. Okay, I think that's all about the attractions now that we've talked about them for forever and a day, because it's hard to just give a brief overview. But that's kind of why we wanted to spend the time and do it, because there's so much interesting lore. So to speak behind all of these attractions and why they exist the way they do and why one looks this way and one looks the other way, we're going to hop now to do just a brief comparison of the resorts, because it's not going to take us very long to do that, because Disneyland doesn't have a lot. So I will tackle this part, Kate, because you have been talking all about the attractions for us. I do want
to talk about why the resorts are the way they are.
Yes, and that's fine. We can definitely do that. But thank you for sharing all of that wonderful little brief lightning round history of some of these attractions with us. But let's talk about the resort hotels at the two different parks. So with Disney World, again, we talked about that it is such a big space. They have so much more land to work with. It's just a massive area. So a couple things that are just kind of perks about the resorts that I'll talk about. They do have free busing, which you need because they are not within walking distance of the park unless you're at like 2 or like 4 of the resorts. Maybe you can,
or you're driving yourself.
Yes. But they also have the Skyliner, they have monorails, they have the boats. Again, the Skyliner and boats, those things, they just don't exist at Disneyland because there's no need for them because space is a thing. Disneyland does have a monorail, but it doesn't serve the same purpose as Disney World's monorail does. So Disney World, it's more about getting you to the parks, and back and forth, and it's a major mode of transportation, whereas Disneyland's is a little, it does get you to the parks, but it's kind of in an anticlimactic way.
It's more of a ride than it is transportation.
Yes.
It does get you to the Disneyland Hotel / Downtown Disney.
Yes.
But only under certain circumstances. Right. If it's running.
Yes. So, yes. And then in the parks, it takes you, and it doesn't, you want to experience Disneyland from Main Street, and it takes you not to Main Street.
You're in Tomorrowland.
Yes. That's all Kate has to say about that.
I have a lot of things to say about Tomorrowland. But
yes. Another thing about the Disney World resorts, which is actually the same at Disneyland, is that there are you get early entry for the parks if you stay on property at one of the resorts, which is 30 minutes before park open. And just a note about Disney World, that one of the perks for 2025 is they did offer a free water park ticket on your arrival day for packages that you're booking for Disney World. So again, just those little perks that make it kind of worth it to stay if you're able to afford it. So let's talk about kind of affordability here. So there are a couple different categories that you see at Disney World. And again, we've talked about all of these, and I will mention that we did in-depth overviews. That was contradictory. We did in-depth discussion about all of the resorts and some off-property resorts as well, several episodes back on Mom Street, but all of that information is still good, and you can refer to that if you need to know more about the resorts. But there is a campsite that exists at Fort Wilderness, generally from anywhere from $75 to $200 a night. The value resorts, you've got about 5 resorts that range generally $175 to $250 a night, which is sad to see that number because it didn't used to be that high, but that's the average that they give on the website now. Yeah. Anyway, there are moderate levels, about 5 resorts, but also including cabins at Fort Wilderness in there as well. And that ranges anywhere from $250 to $400 a night. And then the deluxe, there are 12 total that include the Swan and Dolphin, which are Marriott partner hotels, but do fall under that deluxe category. And those start around $500 a night and go all the way up through the ceiling. Literally. So tons and tons and tons of resort options for you to utilize at Disney World. I do think there are a lot of benefits for staying on property. I do think a lot of people also stay off property. There are tons of surrounding area resorts as well that you can pick and choose from. But that's kind of the overview of the Disney World side. And then, Kate, did you have anything you wanted to add about the Disney World resorts before I hop over to Disneyland?
I think you just have to think of the intention behind how it was built. We have the Disney World bubble. And it was always meant, the Contemporary was the very first one that was ever created. And then we have the Poly. And from there, then they just kept growing and adding in. I think at one point, Caribbean Beach was the largest resort in at least in America, if not the world, when it was created. So very, very large properties with lots of walking, but activities and a lot of things to do as well. But the Disneyland, of course, the Disneyland Hotel, they didn't even own the Disneyland Hotel for a really long time. It took them from the Rather Corporation, took them many years to get that property back. And I think that's when they also got the Spruce Goose and like a whole bunch of other things, random things that they ended up getting the Queen Mary in that deal to get the Disneyland Hotel back. So they have the Disneyland Hotel. These are all deluxe resorts. The Disneyland Hotel and Pixar Pier, and they have the Grand Californian, which is the actual closest one to the parks that they created. And, at Disneyland, everything's walking distance to the parks. So there's no, unless you choose to stay off-site far away, right? You're going to be able to walk to the parks. But the deluxe resorts they're all really, really, really expensive. Really, I rent DVC points to stay there once in a blue moon. Even that is pretty spendy, and it's very hard to get. You got to schedule it about 11 months out to get it. But there's also some really good neighbor hotels that are around, all those places that Walt Disney called the leeches. They're no longer called that. They're now good neighbor hotels.
Good neighbors. So sorry. We called you that before.
And so there's some great places. And my recommendation is always to stay across the, as close as you can on Harbor Boulevard across from the plaza. There's some pretty good hotels in that area that they're motels a lot of the time. They're not. If you're used to Disney quality hotels, just change your expectations.
Yes, they are good neighbors. They are not technically Disney resorts.
Yeah,
So.
I have a question from Christine over here. Do they have any moderate or value resorts owned by Disney at Disneyland, or is it all deluxe? They have 3 hotels, and they are all deluxe resorts. They are no moderate, no value resorts at all.
They start at around $500 a night.
Yeah.
And that's like an off-season cheapest room you can find if you get lucky to get that rate. So
yeah, I don't think I've ever found it at that rate. So that's a really good deal if you find $500 a night.
Yes.
So the good news is, though, if you're staying at Disneyland, you don't have to stay quite as many days, at least. Right. So, you could balance that out if you're a Disney World or going to Disneyland. But yeah. But that's kind of the lowdown, I think, between the resorts and the situation there between the two.
Yes, I agree. Yes, like Kate mentioned, we did talk about doing Disneyland as a worlder, like just 1 or 2 episodes ago. So refer back to that if you're looking for more comparisons. If you're used to world and planning to go to land, that can help you, because I know we talked about kind of
length.
Yes. All of those details about everything. So, okay. So that is where we are going to pause our discussion on Disney World and Disneyland comparing, and give you kind of the end of our part 1, because we went really long with all of them. There's so much information. It's hard.
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
It's my fault.
I didn't say that. So next,
I did. It totally was my fault.
So, on our next episode, we are going to talk about the differences and compare food, events, and entertainment. So that will be coming next. But before we completely wrap this up, we are going to do our Ask the Moms, which is the segment that we do at the end of every podcast episode. We take a question from our community here at Mom Street, and we answer it to the best of our ability. It may or may not be related to what we are currently talking about in the episode, and this one is not. So I will read it, and then I think we can both probably give some input on this one. But the question that we have is, we are visiting Disney World during Christmas time. I know it will be busy, but what are some things we need to know before our trip about visiting during this time?
Why don't you go first, Jackie? Because I'm sure you've got some ideas.
Yeah, so I actually just did Thanksgiving week. That was the last trip that my family took. And I will say that our trip, we purposefully did not plan a ton of park days because we knew that it was going to be really busy. So we knew that we wanted to experience some of the things outside of the park because the parks were going to be so busy and so crowded. So we did some of the extra stuff, right? Like we went to the resorts and looked at all of the decorations. We did the Christmas tree stroll at Disney Springs. So there's a ton to do. outside of the parks. So I think keeping that in mind and maybe being flexible with your park days, getting some park hoppers would be helpful. Just because if a park gets to be too much, then you can tap out and not feel bad because you know that you can either go to a different park or just take a break and maybe circle back later in the day. So having that flexibility is really important. And I think also just knowing that you have to go into it knowing that you're not going to get everything done. You just have to. So getting your priority list figured out, but also making sure that you're not trying to take on too much during that time of year is really important. So like when we went, we did some of the parties as well. When we went, which are so much fun and definitely worth it if it's within your budget. But it was one of those conversations that I had with my kids, like, okay, we're going to the Christmas party at Magic Kingdom. Our ride list is going to have to be shorter because we have this party and it's going to be busy.
What one ride do you want to do?
Yeah. And that's what it was. All four of us picked one ride and then we were like, oh, okay, now we ended up being able to swing it because you can get in a little early and, those types of things with the parties, but that we got through those four and it was like, okay, let's add two more. Now let's figure out what those two are and kind of go incrementally. Definitely did not want to promise the world and not be able to deliver to my kids when it came to that. So that I think is hugely important.
Right. I have a note too from Vinny over here in my chat that says, be aware of early Magic Kingdom closures as well for Mickey's Very Merry Christmas Party. So yes, be very aware of that schedule. Mm-hmm. Those can be some of the best days if you have park hoppers to go to Magic Kingdom because they can be really lower crowds those days.
Yes. So. And I will say that is not the trend that we've seen with the Jollywood party. So don't assume that applies to both. That we have seen that a lot with Magic Kingdom, but with Hollywood Studios, there really isn't a huge difference on the nights that they have the Jollywood party, that the days really see any less of a crowd, partially because they still run a Phantasmic for day guests, even when Jollywood happens, whereas like at Magic Kingdom, they don't do the standard fireworks show. So I think that's a huge difference that you need to take note of when it comes to those days. But yeah, I definitely think making sure you're looking at the schedule and also just checking the hours frequently because the hours will fluctuate, especially if you're there like Christmas week. The hours will fluctuate. They'll open earlier, they'll open later, those types, or say open later into the evening. So those types of things you need to look at as well.
Yeah. And I think I would definitely look into some things that are maybe special offerings, things that they don't have the rest of the time, besides, the things that Jackie already mentioned, but any special treats they have. They don't have as many in Disney World as they do in Disneyland, to be honest. But that's something that I always like to do is kind of like, this is a special time of year. What things can I do that are unique to this time? They even had like the photo frames up for the Very Merry Christmas Party. They left those up during the day where you could get photos there and whatnot. And I think, I agree with Jackie, just adjusting your expectations for what you're going to be able to do and go into it knowing that whatever you get to do is a bonus because it's just not the same when it's really, really busy. If you go into it thinking, I'm going to get all these rides done and do all these things, and then you're upset at the end of the day. So if you go into it just thinking like, okay, well, I'm just going to go enjoy my day, and if it gets really crowded, we're going to go for a break and swim in the pool, or we're going to, go get a treat or go see a show or do something that doesn't require fighting the crowds or standing in line for a really long time.
Right. And I would also encourage you to, it sounds silly, but plan some time to just exist on Main Street at Christmas time. Because there's just something so magical about the giant Christmas tree and the toy soldiers and all of the wreaths and the decor, and just there's something to be said about that time of year, being very purposeful with taking some time to look around at your surroundings. And that can be in all the parks, obviously, but Main Street is going to be your kind of the center point of a lot of the decorating when it comes to that. But same thing with the resorts and there's trees at every park and there's trees at every resort. So, getting to experience some of that, I would definitely carve out some time to make sure you do that.
Well, and do they have it in Disney World? I can't remember because it's been a minute, but do they have the tree lighting on the schedule like they do in Disneyland?
I don't think so. I think
Disneyland is like
Disneyland
an
has
event.
a bigger thing. Yeah. And I think Disney World, it just kind of comes on at dusk.
It's like, and the tree's lit. There it is.
Yeah.
At Disneyland, it's like we gather and we all wait for it to
Right.
happen. And the same thing with Small World. It's
Yes.
like an event when they light it up. So
Right.
it's interesting.
I don't think that's a thing at Disney World.
They should make it a thing. It's fun.
They should. They should. It would be like, how fun would it be to have like a family flip the switch to turn the tree on?
Oh yeah. Right. Gosh. Like Osborne Spectacle of Lights.
Oh,
Yeah.
sad.
Yeah. Sorry.
It's great.
Brought back the pain. Okay.
Yeah, so I think in a nutshell that we gave you hopefully some good tips to answer your question. And as always, we love hearing from our Mom Street community, and we thank you to those of you who have submitted questions for our Ask the Mom segment. And if you have questions that you need answered, need help with, can't find the answer, want our opinions and advice on, send them our way. We are momstreetusa@gmail.com or at momstreetusa on all of the social media platforms. You can find us any of those places.
Yes. So I think that pretty much just wraps things up. Yeah.
Yeah. So like I said, next time you will hear a little bit more about Disneyland versus Disney World. Hopefully a little bit less, because the rides were a big part of that, right? Like that's the huge comparison. But we are going to talk about food. Food is vastly different. We're going to talk about events and entertainment. Again, we're going to hit probably more on the it's a locals park versus a tourist attraction. You'll probably hear and get sick of us saying that a lot next in our next episode.
We're sorry in advance. And I'll probably have more history, and I'm sorry.
It's okay. We wouldn't expect anything less from you. Well, thank you all so much for joining us for this episode of Mom Street USA. We appreciate you all being in here. We are so grateful for our Mom Street community, and we love getting the chance to give you some advice and tips and spread some Disney magic your way on each of our episodes. And we will see you next time on Mom Street USA.
Bye, everybody. Thanks for being with us.